Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott Butcher with Nutec Group, and we are so thrilled to have Harry Moser with us today, but we are equally excited that you're taking a big part out of your day to join us. So thank you so much for joining us for this presentation today. Nutec Group, we work with some of the nation's largest manufacturers, as well as smaller private manufacturers that are really the backbone of industry. We provide integrated planning, architecture, engineering, construction, and facilities management services, both from our offices here in York as well as a satellite office in Hunt Valley, Maryland. Some of you know us as Nutec Group, but there are 3 operating companies in here, and I know some of you know us individually as Nutec Design, Nutec Facilities, or JDB Engineering. Really, we're one big company, but because of legal, liability, and marketing reasons, we sort of have these 3 separate identities. Because much of what we do is with industry, when Harry talks about reshoring jobs, bringing manufacturing employment to America, it's a topic that is near and dear to our hearts, because that's really the core of what we do here, manufacturing projects. If you had a chance to look at the slideshow, you've probably seen some familiar names. We've worked with Harley-Davidson and the Hershey Company and Caterpillar and some of the big brand names that you know of. But also we work with a number of smaller regional manufacturers that provide products both to these larger manufacturers as well as directly to consumers. They just aren't household brands. We've done things like analyze Pepperidge Farms Logistics Network, help Magnesita Refractories install a new process line in an old forgotten corner of their plant that they thought they'd never be able to do anything with, help Top Flight upgrade and replace their mechanical and electrical systems, help Procter & Gamble consolidate their manufacturing space, laid out new manufacturing lines for Johnson Controls. So we do a variety of projects of all sizes, small to big, and the smaller to mid-size plant upgrades are sort of our bread and butter work. Within the past 2 months, we've been really fortunate. We're working with a company here in New York called Unilife to provide engineering services to help them upgrade their facilities with new clean manufacturing space, as well as a company that you've probably never heard of called Usen German company that's going to open their first manufacturing plant in the United States in Delaware, and we're working with them to design their new building. They make the mortar that's used for tiling. So that'll be a really interesting project. So that's a sample of what we do every day to try to help our clients positively impact their bottom line, whether it's reducing cost, adding capacity, or getting a better quality product into their customers' hands quickly and cheaply and better than their competitors. Some of you have helped yourself to food and beverage. Please, throughout the presentation today, eat and drink everything you see because we don't want to clean it up. If you need to use the restrooms, out the doors here to the right, and we have signs that are going to take you back across the building. This building looks like a barn because it was a barn. It was built originally in the 1850s, burned to the ground in the 1930s. Cause of fire, spontaneous combustion. A little spark in the roof fell into the hayloft and up went the building. But as they reconstructed it, they used a lot of the charred timbers which remained exposed at certain places in the building. We moved in here in 1989, restored the building to an office, and then we're in an addition that was put onto the building in 2007. A couple things before we begin today. I want to point out a couple people. They're going to introduce themselves a little later on. But Steve Jamison, President of Nutec Facilities, Mark Ottemer, President of Nutec Design, Andy Shakley, our Executive Vice President, Dave Atkins, he's Vice President, and he oversees our manufacturing segment operations. Tim Warren, he's the new President of JDB Engineering. Congratulate him. He's day 7 or 8 on the job, Tim, something like that. Sarah has jumped out for a minute, but you've probably seen her running around here, our Senior Marketing Coordinator and Event Planner. If there's anything that you need while you're here today, please see Sarah or me and we'll make it happen. And finally, I want to introduce Dave Yarish. A lot of you are here today because of Dave. He's very tenacious on the telephone, getting people to meet with us or come visit us. And he's a large reason why we have this program today through the relationship he was able to develop with Harry. So with that, Dave's going to introduce our program.
Thank you, Scott. A little applause for Scott.
Thank you.
Okay. Hey, it's good to see y'all. There are a lot of familiar faces in the crowd. Being in the New York area for the last 20 to 25 years, I have met a lot of key people, so we're really arguing that you could make it this afternoon and you took time out of your busy lives to do that. The topic for our forum this afternoon is the Reshoring Initiative, bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States, where they belong. Manufacturing has always been at the core of the economy, as we know, in this region. For over the past 150 years, air conditioners, automobiles, motorcycles, machine tools, peppermint patties, potato chips, tanks, turbines are just a few of the things that have been made in New York and the surrounding towns. Manufacturers have traditionally employed over 20% of their workforce locally, compared to around 10% nationally. So obviously in this area it's a major impact on all of us. While manufacturing jobs have declined by about 40% in the country, since 1970, Pennsylvania saw its workforce decline by nearly 2/3. Our speaker today received his Bachelor of Science and Master's degree in engineering from MIT and an MBA from the University of Chicago. He retired as Chairman Emeritus of a company called AG Charmy. Did I say that right? I had to practice that for about 30 seconds. And founded the Reshoring Initiative in 2010. Due to his success with the initiative, our speaker was inducted into the Industry Week Manufacturing Hall of Fame, and he was named Quality Magazine's Quality Professional of the Year in 2012. He has been interviewed by Fox Business News, testified before Congress, and has met with President Obama. But don't hold that against him. In January of 2013, he won the Economist Magazine debate on outsourcing and offshoring. Please help me in welcoming, all the way from Chicago, Harry Moser.
So it is great to be here. I appreciate it very much. I spent a fair amount of time in Pennsylvania because I sold machine tools, and Pennsylvania is a great manufacturing state. So I think most of it was in either around Philadelphia or around Pittsburgh or Meadville. But you're a great state, and I understand, I've learned in the last day that York is at least as good as any of those locations. What we decided we'd do to start off with is ask everybody to, in no more than 30 seconds, tell us who you are. So we'll start over here.
Mark Ottenmiller, President of Nutec.
Good example.
Dave Harrison, part of the Business Development Group here at Nutec.
John Lloyd with Mantech, one of Pennsylvania's industrial resource centers and an MEP center for the Department of Commerce.
Mike Moyer, C.H. Reed in Hanover, Pennsylvania.
Joe Hackett, I'm with People.
Dennis Reed with C.H. Reed in Hanover. We're equipment distributors and service providers.
Scott Butcher.
Tim Warren, JDB, President.
David Nikoloff, President of the Economic Development Company in Lancaster.
Dave Atkins, Vice President of Nutec Design.
Mark Robertson, I'm one of the lean implementers with Mantech.
Hi, I'm Sherry Collins. I serve as the Executive Director of the Ben Franklin Tech Development Authority with the Department of Community and Economic Development.
John Buhite, Governor's Access Team. Taylor Davis, I'm with Morgan Keller Construction, for commercial general contractor.
Bob Riley with Congressman Scott Perry's office.
I'm Steve Jamison, President of Nutec Facilities.
Frank Mazza, Regional Manager for Senator Mattoon.
Andy Shakley, Vice President with Nutec Design Associates.
Nadine Kupner, and I'm with Senator Mike Watt's office.
Katie Miles with York County Economic Alliance.
Lauren Boyer, I'm a business reporter at
Linda Goldstein, I'm with the Harrisburg Regional Chamber and the Capital Region Economic Development Corporation.
Matt Leonard, Senator Bob Casey's office.
I'm Daryl. Oh, sorry.
Whatever.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm Daryl Otterson, also with the York County Economic Alliance.
Mike Smeltzer with the Manufacturers Association.
I'm Ash Khare, Special Assistant to the Secretary, Department of Community and Economic Development. I'm here because this guy would not leave me alone.
Can anybody else say the same?
I'm not sure. They have to come. Work with Sherry.
And I'm Sarah Gensel, I'm Marketing Coordinator here at Nutec.
Good. Thank you all for being here. I can't remember all the names, but I think we'll manage. Give you a little more background than what Dave gave you. I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, right across the river from New York. And the biggest company in town was Singer Sewing Machine. And who used to have a singer? Their mother or somebody had a singer. And in its day, the factory there was the largest building in the world at a time when everybody had a sewing machine at home, and the U.S. dominated world manufacturing. And my grandfather was a foreman. My dad ran about a third of the factory. I worked there summers in high school and college. And 5 years ago, I drove past, and it's all gone. Nothing Singer is made there anymore. Everything's made outside the country. And I cried then for what we had lost. My family tradition, the city of Elizabeth, the state of New Jersey, the country. And as I went through my career selling machine tools around the country, I came to company after company after company that were gone. There used to be great textile mills and shoe machine factories, all kinds of things all over, especially New England, somewhat down in the southeast here on shore, just gone. Big machine tool companies, foundry equipment companies, and just absolutely gone and replaced by product coming in from offshore. And so for that reason, because of that emotional connection to manufacturing and having seen so much loss, I decided to start the Reshoring Initiative. And I'm going to tell you about Reshoring Initiative, and some economic and skilled workforce plans that we have that I hope you'll find interesting and might choose to implement here in York or central Pennsylvania or Pennsylvania as a whole. That's why I'm here. And I'm very much appreciative of Dave encouraging me to come, and Nutec helping me get here.
I've been too for a long time.
and making it all happen. Reshoring and total cost of ownership. Reshoring is bringing it back. Total cost of ownership is the best methodology for a company to make the decision of should I make it here or should I make it there and bring it here. I often call the presentation to offshore or reshore, how to objectively decide. Because as you'll see as I go through the presentation, that the majority of companies do not objectively decide. They don't decide in the interest of the entire company. Instead, typically the supply chain or the purchasing department locally maximizes for that department, and instead of looking at the interests of the entire company. And so we try to get them to do otherwise, and to the extent that you can get them in your community to do otherwise, then you will have more manufacturing jobs here. How many of you are actually manufacturers, per se? Okay. It'd be nice if we had more, and the objective should be next time to get more. Okay, because finally they're the ones that have to change their behavior. I'll do better if we turn this on. Okay. Here we go. Okay. This is how I broke the timing down. I'm going to make a presentation now for about 40 minutes. I put 10 minutes of Q&A in at the end. You're welcome to ask questions during the presentation, but if you do, then we won't have as much time for the 10 minutes of Q&A. But you're still welcome, especially if I'm unclear on something. If I say something you have no idea what I'm talking about, ask the question. Then I'm going to present some related to reshoring somewhat, plans for economic and skilled workforce development. And I'm listening to most of your titles, your majority of you are more or less in economic development, one way or the other. And so I think this will fit with you. Again, some time for Q&A, and then some time at the end where, sort of summing it all up, I hope that you might all say, this is worth pursuing, this is worth having a bigger group for a larger audience, this is worth applying some of these methodologies. I hope to do that, and I'd love to help you do that, and if you don't, then I'll go help Missouri or Mississippi, or somewhere else. But I'd love Pennsylvania to be a great place to help. A couple of definitions. First, reshoring, backshoring, onshoring, insourcing. There's probably 10 other terms that are used for it. Home shoring, right shoring, all these things, they all mean the same thing. Essentially, it's something was made here and it was made for a while outside the country and it came back. Okay, reshore, very, very, very clear. And but it's all about things that will be sold or assembled here. So we don't in any sense suggests that the U.S. should make toasters and supply the Indian market with toasters. It's just not going to happen. Or refrigerator, not going to happen. Doesn't make any economic sense. But in the same sense, most of our toasters and refrigerators and television sets should be made here instead of made somewhere else and brought here. So we're talking finally about what Caterpillar refers to as localization. Make most of the products in the market in which they're going to be consumed. And I'll give you some detail on why that makes the most sense. It's producing near the consumer. One of the factories you talked about, or Scott talked about, was a German company coming in to make mortar here. So what they're doing, they're building their first factory here. So they're doing FDI, foreign direct investment, to produce near the consumer, because it probably doesn't make any sense to ship mortar, halfway across the world to get it here. But all of the transplants like Toyota, Mercedes, all these factories that are going into, especially into the southeast, they're really following the same logic. Because why does Toyota come here to build cars? Because it makes sense to make them near where they're going to be sold. Why does GE decide to bring water heater production back from China? Because it makes sense to make them near where they're going to be sold. So it's exactly the same economic logic that drives what you might call retention, or you might call reshoring, or foreign direct investment. It's all driven by the economic logic of producing near the consumer. And the tools that I'll show you are tools for quantifying those benefits and helping the customer see them, so that it makes it easier to convince them to retain, reshore, or foreign direct invest. So to put it a little more, make this a little more visual, in this map, the green is the U.S. So reshoring would be bringing it back to the U.S., and nearshoring would be bringing it back to the blue, to Canada or Mexico. And then offshoring would be everywhere else in the world. And since I'm an American, and since my heart is here, and my first choice is to reshore, to bring work back to the U.S. But there is some work that's so labor intense that if you said I'm going to make it in the U.S. or it can stay in China, well, it's going to stay in China or India or somewhere like that, because there's such a labor intensive nature of the work. And so sometimes it makes sense to bring back some product and put the most labor intense portions, say, into Mexico, and put the high skill, high technology portions into the US, and assemble it, whichever one makes sense. And if it turns out that the only way to get the work back here is to do that, is to have the US and Mexico team up against China, well, then it's better for the US to be part of the winning team rather than all of the losing team, if all the work stays in China. So I'm not here to advocate taking work to Mexico, but I'm here to say that sometimes that makes sense, and we should at least recognize that. And the logic that we present is we think universally valid. So if you had a factory in Brazil and it was supplying the South American market, then reshoring would be bringing the work back to Brazil, and nearshoring would be producing in the rest of South America to support that factory, and offshoring would be everywhere else, including the U.S. So, and the reason I present this is that if you're talking to a bigger Harley Davidson or a Hershey or somebody else that maybe produces around the world, and if you said, why don't you consider reshoring? And they say, well, that's this nationalistic stuff. We're a worldwide company. We have to apply the same logic, the same rules everywhere in the world. The same logic, the same rules do work everywhere in the world. And reshoring is internationally relevant. About 2 years ago, I was sitting in the office. I had a call. It was Japanese National Public Radio. And they said, Reshoring Initiative. He asked Mr. Moser, he asked, what can I do for you? And this is the Japan that started offshoring back 50, 60 years ago, radios, televisions, T-shirts, whatever. And I said, what can I do for you? And they said, we have a problem, we need your help. And I said, what's the problem? They said, China is stealing all of our jobs. This is what they had done to us 50 years before. And so I sent them some information and did what I could to help. But the point is that even the Chinese worry about the jobs being offshore to Vietnam and Cambodia. There's always somewhere cheaper, whatever, to do the thing. So our logic, we provide the logic, the economics, to calculate and see whether it really is finally cheaper to go to that other location. Now it turns out that most companies didn't do the logic, so the majority of companies, maybe 60% according to this survey, used only very simplistic measures when they try and decide, should I site the factory here in York or should I site it in China or Mexico? Should I buy the components here or should I buy them somewhere else? And so the most simplistic measure is wage arbitrage. You're going to where the wages are cheapest. So Jack Welch famously once said, I'd like to put my factories on barges and move them to the country that has the lowest wage and sufficient skill and produce the products there, and then when the wages get too high, I'll move the barge to the next country and then to the next country and then to the next country, so you don't have to keep tearing down building buildings. He never actually did it. A little more sophisticated would be purchase price variance, PPV. So most supply chain groups are judged by purchase price variance. And if somebody's responsible, they used to buy $100 million worth of stuff, and all that stuff this year they're supposed to get it for $95 million. And only looking at the price, not looking at the impacts on the rest of the company, the carrying cost of the inventory, the travel costs, the warranty costs, the intellectual property risk, the probability of stocking out and not being able to meet demand. So still nowhere near adequate measure. A little more sophisticated would be landed cost, which would be the purchase price plus the duty freight and the packaging, getting a little better. A few will talk about total landed cost and add in one or two more factors. You might have 6 factors, but when they do that, they're still missing maybe 20% or 30% of the total cost. And if you think your cost is 10 and your cost is really 12 or 13, then some of the time you're going to make the wrong decision. So some were lucky and they didn't do the math, but the wage differences were so great and the Chinese government was so supportive of their efforts that they made money and it worked out for them. So many have found out since that it didn't work out as well as they thought, and specifically today it doesn't work out even as well as it used to. So this is a chart that shows the unit labor cost of manufacturing expressed in US dollars. And it takes a variety of countries, but the two most important are the US and China. So it takes everybody's unit cost per, labor cost per unit of production expressed in dollars, indexes them to 100 back in 2000, and then adjusts them going forward for changes in the average wage rate in the local currency, change in the currency relative to the US dollar, and productivity. So it's pretty easy to understand for the US. Well, in that time period in the US, we've had roughly 2% wage increases and roughly 2% productivity increases. So the labor cost expressed in dollars per unit of output has stayed about the same because the productivity and the wage increases roughly balanced each other off. Whereas in China, instead of staying at 100, it's up to 320 or 340 or something like that. So, and that's happened because they've had roughly 15 to 18% per year increases in wages expressed in dollars. So maybe 13 or 14% in wages, and then 2 or 3% in terms of currency, coming out to somewhere in the 16 to 18% range. And when you take that and you compound it for all those years and adjust for maybe the productivity going up at 6 or 8%, you get the kind of effect you see here. And so even though they started with almost no wages, when you come up to 3 or 4 times something really small, you get to something that's measurable. And so and why is that happening? Two reasons. First, the demand for labor has gone up dramatically because their real income, their standard of living, has risen dramatically. So they want more services, they want more products. And second, the supply of labor is dropping. We think of China as an unlimited supply of labor, but they put anybody know how long ago they put the one-child policy in?
30 years ago.
35 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So everybody who's sort of 35 or less, there's only sort of half as many of them as there would have been, maybe a fourth as many as there would have been 100 years ago. So their working age population is declining at about 3.5 million a year. So you've got the supply of labor doing this and the demand for labor going that, so the price of labor just keeps on going up. So unless they have a major recession, unless their economy, drops off to only grow at 0% or -3 or something like that, I believe their wages are going to keep going up, and as long as that happens, we'll become relatively more competitive. So the Boston Consulting Group, a very famous group, has done a lot of studies on this, and they've pointed out that they expect a renaissance in manufacturing in the U.S., and increasingly it's happening. And specifically, they say that they expect that net labor costs for manufacturing in China and the U.S. will converge by around 2015. Now, they first said this about 2 years ago. And so what they did not say was that the wages per hour would converge. They didn't even say that the wages, or that the unit labor cost would converge. What they said was, or what they meant was, if this is 0, that back 15 years ago, the Chinese wages were somewhere down here, and U.S. was here, right? And the Chinese have grown dramatically, so they're up to here somewhere, say. And on the average, the productivity differential between the U.S. and China is about 3 to 1. So you got to multiply that times 3 to get relative unit labor costs. And they said that material cost is always about the same. Steel, copper, oil costs about the same. So what counts is this versus this. And they said when you take a look at the total cost, when you look at the carrying cost of the inventory, the travel cost, the freight cost, all these other things, that by about 2015 in a lot of industries, when you add those what we call hidden costs in, this number will be bigger than that number for sales in the U.S. So that does not mean that you can make that you can put a foundry into York and ship castings to China to sell, because when we do that, then we have to add those extra costs in. But we're also, in all cases, we're talking about products for sale here in the United States. For another lady, this Michelle Wyoka, wrote in the New York Times that what's happening is that the Chinese are no longer just thankful not to go hungry. So where, say, 50, 60 years ago, they were happy to be alive. Remember Mao and Chiang Kai-shek and the Long March? It was miserable. Huh? And then maybe 10 or 15 years ago, they were happy not to go hungry. But now they go on the internet and they see how your workers live. That your workers have a car, they have a house, a couple of kids. Life really is. They go hunting, they have a good time. Life really is pretty good. And so the Chinese are rapidly working their way up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. How many remember Maslow from school? Okay? It's like nice to hear something you heard once in school, huh? And see somebody actually sort of using it. So the Reshoring Initiative, the group that I founded and lead, we provide a number of things that helps companies deal with this, or helps, say, economic developers help companies deal with this. So first is the total cost of ownership estimator. So you start with the price, the ex-works price from, say, China, for example, and from the US. And then you answer a series of questions in each case, and then it calculates the carrying cost and the travel cost and the intellectual property risk and all these things to come out with a total cost, so that you can say, I've quantified everything that I think is relevant, and now I can see really how to make the right decision. Should I have the factory here? Should I have it there? Should I buy the castings or the fittings, whatever, here, or should I get them there? Second, we have a library. It has currently about 425 articles. We'll soon have about 700, 800. And you can go in there and sort and say, what industries are coming back into Pennsylvania, for what reasons, from what country, something like that. You filter too many times and you only find 1 or 0. Huh? But at least you can see the trends as to what is happening. We have a case studies template. So when a company here has reshored, if your company reshores, or if Nutec helps a company build a factory to reshore, you can go online, report that case. This company brought that product back from this country for these reasons, with the help of Nutec, with the help of some machine tool supplier, whatever it is. And it creates a PDF that all the companies can post on their website to brag about how effective they were. So you can get free publicity, and then in addition, the person who posts it gets a free Manufacturing is Cool t-shirt. So you'd want to be the first in your community to get one of these. And these are provided by mfg.com, which is a business-to-business portal where you can go on and say, I want to buy 1,000 of these, and they put you together with people that will make them for you. So that's the case studies template. How many of you are familiar with a shortage of skilled, tool makers, precision machinists? Everybody knows about that, right? And I think there's a tight connection between what we do and that issue, because if you're a smart high school student, and let's say a couple of years ago you're graduating, getting ready to graduate, and you say, let's say, should I go into manufacturing? Should I become a tool maker? Let's say. Well, looks like all the jobs are going offshore. Looks like we're in a post-industrial society. Why would I want to do an apprenticeship and become a tool maker if there aren't going to be any jobs? That doesn't make any sense. Whereas I can become a teacher, I can become a lawyer. That's not good anymore either, but there's all kinds of jobs that look a lot safer here. Even plumber, because the people here, if you need someone to do your plumbing, you can't hire a cheap Chinese guy to do the plumbing. You have to hire an American, because that's all you got here is Americans. So the tendency was for the student, the guidance counselor, et cetera, to decide that manufacturing wasn't a good choice. And so to convince people that manufacturing is a good choice, the best way to do it is for them to see that reshoring is happening. Because when they see reshoring happening, they say not only isn't it going away, it's starting to come back. And therefore it becomes a more valid decision and recommendation for the guidance counselor, for the student, or the parent. So we believe that as we succeed at reshoring and that trend becomes more visible, it'll be easier to recruit the students into manufacturing. Because if we don't recruit them, then reshoring can't happen. Because as we ultimately succeed, the amount of work that will come back will increase manufacturing output by something like 30%, 30, 40%. And if you increase by that much, right now you can't find the people you need. And imagine if we needed 30 or 40% more than we have today. So in the total cost of ownership system, you answer a series of questions, and it creates an automatic output that looks like this. Here's, in this case, the Chinese unit price was 70, and the US unit price was 100. So typically the supply chain manager would look at that and say, that's 30% difference, that's $30 difference. We're making 12,000 units of those a year. That's $360,000 per year of purchase price variance. It's an easy decision. It will go to China because that's a third of my annual objective. I'm going to get my bonus. This is pretty straightforward. But if we can get the individual to use the total cost system and see that the total cost, when you add in all these other considerations that they've in the past ignored, that the total cost is 98 for China and 108 for the US. So now it's getting close. It's not such a black and white decision anymore. And then assuming going forward that the Chinese wages go up at 15% a year in dollars instead of the traditional 18, and that the US continues at the 2 or 3% per year, then in about 3 years, the Chinese total cost will be higher. So now hopefully the supply chain person would say, we probably shouldn't send any more categories of work abroad, and for the work that's out there now, we should start investing, hiring, training, automating, or finding local suppliers that can do that for us. Because strategically, over the next couple of years, it's not going to make any sense to have them work abroad as long as they look at all the costs. If they don't look at all the costs, then these things aren't going to intersect till 10, 15, whatever years later. So when people come on to use our software is free on the website. They come online, they use it. We retain their data. We guarantee to protect their confidentiality. We do not even ask them their company name, but we analyze the data, and we conclude that the total cost on average is about 30% above that X works price and 20% above the landed cost. So when they've been using those simplistic measures, they've been missing quite a bit. And we look at the percentage of the work where the US price is higher, but where the US total cost is lower, and we conclude that that's on the order of 25% today. So as a very rough calculation, we say that if all companies would switch from price or landed cost over to total cost for doing this calculation, that something like 25% of the work that's offshore would come back today. Now, you've got factories, you've got a factory, you've got all kinds of contracts, it doesn't happen like this, but it would make sense, it would be in their interest to bring the work back today. And by, say, 2020, as wages keep going up over there, and we keep getting more automated, et cetera, maybe that goes to 40% or some number like that. So without any economic incentives, without any labor, negotiation, anything else, just doing the homework right, we think that kind of percentage of the work would come back. Here you can see a range of the kinds of companies that have reshored. Some of these big Apple, Motorola, GE, Ford, NCR, Caterpillar, Whirlpool, big companies. Others are smaller branded product OEMs like these. And then we also include companies, this Wright Engineered Plastics is a plastic injection molder in Santa Rosa, California. And Ace Clearwater Enterprises here is a metal fabricator for aerospace components. Again, it happens to be out in California. So the reason I put them up is that even if GE decides to reshore, but it goes out and buys components from a local supplier or contract manufacturer or pump maker or something, foundry, that company is also reshoring because those jobs wouldn't be here if the reshoring had not happened. So all of these are eligible for being classified as reshoring and earning the T-shirt. So this is the most famous case, the single best case, I think, to understand the potential for this. GE brought back water heaters, refrigerators, washing machines, a variety of products. I think the biggest volume of them was water heaters. Brought them back to Louisville, Kentucky, to a heavily unionized facility, one that they've been, it's so big that they've got the traffic lights in the parking lot. To give you a feeling of how big it is, 20,000, 30,000 people at one time. It was down to 1,000 or two. But they brought back the water heaters, hired 1,300 people, invested $800 million in the facility. And the key takeaways on this, two of the reasons this was able to happen. One is the impact on innovation when you put engineering and manufacturing close to each other. Widely observed by Pisano and Shi at Harvard Business School, Michael Porter at Harvard Business School, that when you separate those things, innovation isn't as good. When you bring them back together, it works. So they brought the unit that was being built in China to Louisville. They got the factory workers, the foreman, the fixture designer, the design engineers, the marketing people, got them all together in the war room. They worked for weeks, maybe months on this. And they completely redesigned the product. And as a result of what they did, the thermal efficiency was improved, the warranty costs were reduced, and the actual manufacturing cost, the total cost came down enough that they were able to sell the US made product for 20% less than the product that was made in China. So you got a more efficient, better quality product selling for 20% less than the one that was made in China. Yeah, but that was enabled by the fact that you put the engineers and the manufacturing people together in one room, one language, one time zone, week after week, problem resolution, et cetera, et cetera. Another key point, finally the Chinese ex-works price was still lower than the US ex-works price, but when they looked at the total cost, looked at all the costs, they were able to sell it for less because they started to recognize all those costs. And as a result of this experience, Jeff Immelt has come out and said that for GE, offshoring is history for the appliance division. Their appliances in the future will be made here in the United States. So it was a great success. Here are some Pennsylvania reshorers that I pulled logos from. I've got details on them, but don't have enough time to show you all of them. One fairly close to here is Armstrong in Lancaster. So they brought back their luxury vinyl tile, and they concluded that production cost is lower here than it was in outside the U.S. Foxconn. How many of you are familiar with Foxconn? Okay, a famous company. I think 1.2 million employees, mostly in China, make almost all the Apple product. And they have put a facility into Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, because they believe that they will be able to sell more of the products made here than if they had made them from China.
They only have a design operation they only have a R&D facility, they do not have manufacturing.
Well, R&D is, if you think of a manufacturing company like GE, if you say what's their employment, you would traditionally have included R&D in manufacturing because it's a manufacturing company. That's a good point.
They're looking into it, they're not sure what they want to do.
Yeah. So it connects, and any of you familiar with Rodon Connects? Okay, so they make like Legos more or less, something like that. But they had the product made over in China. They brought it back to Hatfield, and there's articles coming out every week or so about how successful they've been making that simple toy kind of product here in the United States and competing with products that are made from offshore. So I think a very good example that you can compete even in the most simplistic things that traditionally we would think you had to make somewhere offshore. And then Unilife, I think Scott probably mentioned Unilife, okay, that brought back production of pre-filled syringes from China to right here in New York, and apparently successfully. In this case, the FDA compliance was a significant reason, but for many companies, compliance with some kind of regulation is key. Then you can be a lot more confident when you're doing something here in the States than you can offshore, especially if you're offshore and you've got 2 or 3 tiers of suppliers working your way up. Pretty soon you lose total control of what's happening. So there's back maybe 3 years ago, people would say, reshoring is hardly a trickle, much less a trend, and now it's at least a trend. So a survey by Boston Consulting Group just recently found that about 21% of large companies are actively engaged in reshoring, and that was twice the rate of a year before, so rapid increase. This MFG.com that provides the t-shirts surveyed their contract manufacturers that they put together with big companies, and in the first quarter of 2012 found that about 40% of them had done at least some reshoring. Not all reshoring, but some reshoring. At the same time, there's increasing evidence that U.S. consumers prefer a made-in-America product. So we have about 10 surveys that are done by different groups and show a steady increase year after year in the stated preference to buy made in America. There's less data available on the actual buying of made in America. If you have a hammer and you put it out and you don't have, and you put a flag over it and you see how many they buy, and then you don't put a flag over it and see, does the knowledge of made in America make a real difference? So we're trying to gather data on that. But there is at least one company has come out and said that when they started to make it in America and advertise it was made in America, that even though their price went up by 10%, their sales went up by 30%. And there's a company that does that will audit companies as to to prove that the company actually does 100% made in America, and they claim to have a number of their customers where when they put the Made in America label on with the proof, the guarantee, that the sales went up substantially at the same price level. So we're starting a lot of survey data, a lot of preference, starting to develop data saying it's actually people are actually putting their money where their flag is. We calculate that about 80,000 manufacturing jobs have come back to the U.S., have been reshored. Manufacturing employment hit a low in approximately January 2010. Total employment is up. I think at the end of last month it was 536,000, and about 80,000 of that, or roughly 15%, is due strictly to reshoring. And to contrast it with offshoring, back around 2003, sort of 10 years ago, new offshoring or incremental offshoring was happening at the rate of maybe 150,000 manufacturing jobs per year. And reshoring was not even mentioned. If you Googled it for 2003, you probably wouldn't find the word. And maybe it was 2,000, just a total wild guess. And today the offshoring's down to maybe 30 to 50,000, and the reshoring's up to 30 to 40,000. So we've gone from like a 75-to-1 ratio to be roughly in balance. So we have we, and when I say we, Boston Consulting Group, Harry Moser, President Obama, and all these people that have worked on it have, and the natural economic forces, the Chinese not having babies, have caused, I'd say caused the bleeding to stop. You know, we've stopped the ocean liner going forward, so to speak, and now we've got to turn it around. And turning it around will bring back 3 to 4 million jobs. It will probably take 10 to 20 years, 30 years, but we've made a good start on it. So we have this library I mentioned. We put all these articles about reshoring, and we sort them, and these are NAIC code industries. So you can see here the mix of what industries are coming back. So a tendency towards heavier things, appliances, transportation equipment, machinery, things like that. Although increasingly, and so I think almost surprisingly, starting to see a fair amount of clothing and textiles, T-shirts and the kind of things that you wouldn't have expected. But how do you justify apparel coming back? One of the ways is seasonality. It's something that if you're going to bring the Christmas product in, you got to order them in, I don't know, March or something to get them here in time for November. Whereas if you bring them in from China, but if you're bringing them in from North Carolina or Pennsylvania, then maybe you can order them in September and still get them in November, and therefore you can respond better to the actual demand. Reasons for reported cases, this is roughly the distribution, and you can see that the tendency is the obvious economic things, the wages and currency changes, the quality issues, the freight costs, all these kind of real easily or relatively quantifiable kinds of things. Country from which the work comes back, about 60% of it's coming back from China, and I think that's probably because that's where 60% of it is. But it's shown that the China definitely have a sort of a soft underbelly, and they're recognizing this, that they're losing the work. Almost nothing coming back from Europe. The Northeast is lagging in the reshoring effort from our surveys, and the data here is a little bit old. We haven't updated it recently. You can see the South is getting about 40%, in the Midwest about 37% of it, and the Northeast only about 5% of the stated cases. And these are just the stated cases. In addition, generally the largest factories, the largest reshoring cases, the big Caterpillar plants, and NCR plants and such, have gone into the Southeast or maybe Texas, and in the Midwest and Northeast and the West, they tend to be smaller, 50-man, 100-man kind of factories. So if this was done on the basis of employment, it would be even a larger distribution. So a couple of key points. Reshoring is easier than exporting. So the country has had for years, and especially under President Obama, has the export doubling initiative, and it's, for most companies, it's dramatically easier to compete here against imports than it is to be the exporter competing there against local production. Because when you're competing here, the other guy has all these hidden costs, that 20, 30%, and when you're going there, you have all those 20 or 30%. So much more emphasis on reshoring, on substituting local production for imports. That effort should be at least as high as the exporting effort. We believe this is the fastest and most efficient way to strengthen the U.S. economy. That in comparison to tax changes, stimulus programs, all things that normally go on, that by educating companies that it's in their own self-interest to do this, you don't have to bribe them. You don't have to throw the money at them that traditionally is done. Instead, you educate them. You do what Harry Truman used to call applied light instead of heat, so to speak. Show them it's in their interest, and then they will, in many cases, take the action. So because this has relevance for the national economy, Washington has taken notice. The Commerce Department 2012 budget, in an item put in by Congressman Wolf, who runs the CJS subcommittee, had required Commerce to pursue total cost and what he called repatriation. So there's 3 or 4 links on the website that promote reshoring, and specifically linked to our site. And they just, this last year in May, came out with ACE tool. ACE is assess costs everywhere. And that's, you can go to that site, and many of the kinds of data you need to fill into our software, national instability risk, natural disaster risk, this kind of thing, they've got on their site. So I recommend those of you to take a look at that. We've done 6 national MEP webinars. We did one Nutec webinar, and maybe 10 live presentations for MEPs. I work a lot with Select USA, the part of the Commerce Department that focuses on foreign direct investment. So I was sitting in my office in 2012 in January, and one day I had 2 calls from Washington. One was the U.S.-China Economic Security and Review Commission, and the other was the White House National Economic Council, Gene Sperling's office. And they both wanted to know, what do we have to do to bring work back from China? And I said to myself, if I'm going to get 2 calls from Washington on one day, better these 2 than the FBI and the IRS. And so that resulted in the White House Insourcing Forum, President Obama's word for reshoring. And you can see, obviously, there's the president, and this is I. And at that point, I was giving him some tips for the State of the Union message that was coming up in a couple of weeks. And the tips did not make the cut for the message. When I send this out to people, I say, well, I'm the bald guy there to whom the president was speaking. And then that afternoon, we had a C-SPAN panel, and this is Karen Mills, the head of the administrator of the SBA, and then a fellow here runs Master Lock up in Milwaukee, and the lady here brought back call centers, and this is the bald guy. So, generally speaking, companies are often faced with a decision: should I invest here or should I just offshore? Because there's companies in China that can make almost anything for you. Quality, sometimes yes, I don't know, but generally cheap, and then they can do a lot of things. And so the company is sitting here saying, should I just get some subcontractor over there to make it for me, or should I invest in a new facility, called Nutec, get a new facility? Should I buy a lot of capital equipment? Should I do lean? Should I call Mantech in to do lean for me? Should I train the people? Should I really work to engage the people? Or should I just offshore? Well, offshore sounds pretty easy. And if they look at it and they see that this is 0 again, and they see a 30% difference in price between China and here, and if you got your team together, you got your best team and said, if we did the best, if we spent millions on automation and everything else, do you think we can get a good return on investment and actually reduce the manufacturing cost by 30%? In most cases, the answer is going to be no. That's too big a nut. You can't crack it. Whereas if they first did total cost of ownership and saw there was only a 5% difference when they looked at it, when they recognized all the relevant costs, and then they came and they got in Nutec and the equipment supplier and Mantech and the community college to do the training, and said, do you think you can get 5% out of my manufacturing cost and still give me a good return on that investment? Now the answer is, in many cases, going to be yes. So by using the correct metric and seeing that there's really only a 5% difference instead of a 30% difference in some cases, then the probability that that investment is going to happen and you're going to have your local companies investing here or foreign direct investment here just went up dramatically. So what can you do? You can use these tools, the things I've told you about, everything's free on the website. You can use them to motivate retention, local sourcing, foreign direct investment. We have webinars on the website, so obviously everybody isn't here, so you can go to our website, find the archived webinars, get them to people that aren't here to watch them. You can support us by putting up a link. This is an example of a company that has a link to our website, which our logo on it, and the link, that's nice. When you have reshored, you can submit the case, and you can get famous for it, and you can get the t-shirt, okay? And then the t-shirt, you could sponsor. We're always looking for new sponsors. So we're a not-for-profit. We have 38 sponsors now. AMT is the Association for Manufacturing Technology. They put on the IMTS, the big 100,000-person machine tool show coming up this year in September at McCormick Place. SME is the Society of Manufacturing Engineers. This is Gardner, is the Modern Machine Shop, mold making technology, that group of manufacturing publishing companies. my old company, GFAG Charmaine. SPI is the Society of the Plastics Industry, puts on the National Plastics Exposition. Morris Group is a machine tool distributor, one of the biggest in the country, happens to have a facility in Cranberry Township, Pennsylvania. United Grinding, another big machine tool company, and NTMA has chapters all around Pennsylvania. PMA, the same thing. Trade associations, AME, Association for Manufacturing Excellence, like Lean and things like that. Mazak, another big machine tool company, and a whole range of other groups, all of which support us and help make it possible for me to come out and pursue this effort. Very pleased with U.S. Bank, one of the largest U.S. banks. Came on board about a year ago, and in addition to sending us money, which is nice, I've trained their local account executives so that when a company is thinking about financing, say, a machine tool purchase, to do reshoring, they can help them understand total cost and help them improve the analysis and see the return on investment, what it really is. Manex here is the Northern California MEP. So this is how we think of ourselves. This is the last slide of this session. Anybody know who that's supposed to be? Yeah, so a little Dutch boy. I was over in the Netherlands this year speaking. They grabbed it just like that. And so the story is that he's in Holland, and in Holland the land is lower than the North Sea, especially when you're having a storm, and the dike keeps the salt water out of the land, the farms, and you didn't have the dike, all the farm crops are gone and everybody drowns. It's just miserable. So the little Dutch boy is wandering along in the dark, and he sees a little hole in the dike, and he sees the water coming out and the little stones coming out, and the big stones starting to vibrate a little bit. And he says to himself, I could run and get the village elders, but I think by the time I get back, the dike's gone and it's a disaster. But I can stick my finger in the hole and block the hole and hold the dam together and hope the village elders find me so that we can pull my finger out and we can grab the dam. And so conceptually, this is the United States and that's offshoring, and you were the village elders. So if you say, well, Harry, that's a nice talk, it's good of you to come out from Chicago, good luck, guy, well then probably we don't get too much better. But if you take this message and as economic developers and use it to convince your companies with which you deal to invest more here and to use total cost to make a more informed decision in their own self-interest, then there'll be more reshoring and less offshoring, and York will be a better place to work and live, and there'll be better lives for your children and your neighbors.